You're listening to Cottontail's podcast, part of the Silicon Valley Black Project, which produced the documentary film A Place at the Table about the Black pioneers of Silicon Valley. A Place at the Table can be viewed for rent on Vimeo.com on demand /A Place at the Table STEM. Through Cottontail's podcast, the Silicon Valley Black Project will continue to recognize the contributions made by African Americans. We will be featuring African American professionals, technologists in the fields of engineering, administration, and entrepreneurial pursuits from the past and present. Today, we're talking to Brian Miller, CEO of the Reality Capture Technology Center in San Jose, California. Brian overcame a learning disability, and through a fortuitous meeting with Bill Graham, a Bay Area icon in the entertainment industry, Brian Miller was able to travel the globe, enjoying a unique vantage point, working for and with some of the famous and talented people in the world. Using his experiences, Brian has developed an eclectic approach to learning that addresses learning disabilities. Hi, Brian, and welcome to my podcast. Brian, you are a native Californian. There aren't many of us that can claim that distinction. How did your family come here?
My grandfather was in the Navy, and he was transferred to Moffett Field, and that's how my family got here.
There you go.
They came here because he was in, and his story was pretty amazing. You know, he joined it. He was 17 when he joined the Navy, and he told me he made $21.40 a month, and that the apartment that him and my grandmother rented cost $22 a month.
Oh my!
She was cleaning houses. She was cooking. She was doing all kinds of stuff. And at that time, since he was in the Navy, he could only be a cook when he first joined. So, and he ended up teaching over at Stanford after he got out.
So what did you do? Did you go to college after you got out of the military?
He went to college while he was in, and he went when he got out, and just hustled. He just hustled.
Yeah.
So there's some really resilient people.
Yes.
Really resilient people. And so to have those kind of stories go by the wayside, I don't even know that my children know that story about their great grandfather.
Well, you need to tell them.
Yeah, so it's those kind of things that I'm most passionate about.
So what did your dad do? My
dad was in the service. He was in 30 years. Mm-hmm. He was a navigator on P-3 Orions. They were submarine hunters. And so he was based in originally in Whidbey Island, Washington. Then came back down here to Moffett Field, and we settled here in San Jose, or settled in East Palo Alto. Because a lot of black people that were in the military, they went to East Palo Alto for some reason. Our population there was just huge.
Yes.
East Palo Alto's changed significantly since that time. But yeah, that's where we're all Navy people, and so it was a great time too. Wonderful time.
Yeah. So your dad came back. Now, how did he finish his degree as well?
No, he didn't. My dad. I think he was a high school graduate. He never went to school after that.
Okay.
He grew up on a little farm in Louisiana, way down in the bayou. I mean, they hunted and fished for their food. He had 13 brothers and sisters, and they lived off the land. And it was funny because being from California, I would go back and visit my grandparents there, and they still had outhouses in the 70s. And for a kid from California, you're talking about culture shock and fear. You mean I've got to go in that thing?
and you notice they always built them next to the pig pen?
Exactly, right next to the pig pen. Oh, my goodness. But he never... He was a very simple person. He didn't want a lot.
Yeah.
When he got out of the Navy, he went to work for Varian.
Okay.
I don't really know what he did, but he went to work for Varian for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ended up at Raytheon.
Okay.
And at some point, his relationship with my mom was really bad, and so they divorced. And he moved back to his farm, a little farm down in the bayou, and he spent the last 20 years on this little farm. He'd fish and hunt and do all that kind of stuff, but he was a very simple person as far as what he needed. It was just a simpler time too, I guess. But,
yeah. He went back to what he felt comfortable with then.
Right.
So,
he was a country boy his whole life.
So tell me about you now. How did your father brings you to the Bay Area, and you end up staying and living with your mom, I'm assuming. Is that
yes,
right?
Uh-huh. I lived with my mom, and I lived with my grandparents a lot. We lived with my grandparents a lot, which happens a lot in our culture.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
When people go back, we end up living with their grandpa. So for a while, my grandparents probably had an equal influence on me as far as growing up and raising me as my parents. So I went to school here in San Jose at Mount Pleasant High School on the east side.
Okay.
When I went to school, I was an A student from elementary school through junior high school. When I got to high school, I started having real problems. I don't know what it was. I tested well. My IQ was very high for some reason, but it didn't translate into my grades. It wasn't until 2003, when my daughter was born, she was diagnosed with severe autism, that I went into a deep depression. And at that time, I went in to see a doctor, and they said, you definitely have depression, but you also have ADD.
Oh.
And I said, really?
What is that?
And the light came on, because I couldn't understand, and my parents and teachers said I was lazy. When I went to get out of high school, I went to get out of high school, and in my family, college it's not just expected. It's what it is. That's what you do.
Right.
We're all college graduates.
Okay.
And so my sister, my mom, and they're all in education. I'm the only one that wasn't. But so when I got out of high school, the last couple of months, all of a sudden I got into panic. I said, I got to go do something. My parents aren't going to let me stay home. I'm going to have to go to school, or I'm going to have to get a job and leave. So I went to talk to my counselor, and she said, Brian, you pretty much have been messing around this whole time. You haven't focused on anything. You're not college material. You need to just go get you a job somewhere. And I was crushed. Well, all these years later, I found out I have ADD, and that was my problem. But I also knew while I was going through school that I was always the type of person that was a hands-on learner. You can give me a manual or something and tell me to read it, that wasn't going to do any good. So once I got the diagnosis of ADD, that opened the door to where I could see all of these things that were happening through my life. And that's how I got to where I am now.
Oh,
that's why I teach kids now to use technology, and that's why I teach them in a hands-on way.
Yeah.
I'm going to teach you want to learn how to do structural engineering? We're not going to talk about trigonometry and advanced geometry. We're not going to talk about those kind of things. We're not going to talk about calculus. What we're going to do is I'm going to put a laser in your hand, and if you really enjoy what you're doing, and if you really want to know more about it, then we will go deeper into it, and then we will get to the foundations behind that or underneath that. I never could do trig when I was in high school. I couldn't do it until when I started doing laser scanning, and I started going, oh, that's what an XYZ coordinate is. I didn't understand what that was.
Right.
So that's how I got to the point to where I started setting up this nonprofit. I know there are other kids like me out there. So I wanted to be able to figure a way to bring people in, just kind of share with them, have them experience some things, and then try to teach them from that point forward, rather than just sitting them down and making them open a book and say, okay, we're going to go to chapter 1 and we're going to start talking about how we can, we're going to start talking about computer-aided drafting. That didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And I suspect there's a lot of kids it doesn't work for.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things with our public education system was we teach all kids the same way.
Right.
There might have been a time when it worked, but it doesn't work now. And we're losing kids.
You've made a very good point. You were an A student until you got to high school. So something changed there for you. Maybe maybe because you didn't have the close supervision or they didn't pay enough attention. You were going from class to class rather than staying in the classroom, in the one room all day. That might have affected your learning abilities, you know?
I think a big part of it was, too, that in high school, not only were you going to class, but there was a lot more demands upon homework.
Yes.
And while I did really well in the class, I was terrible about doing homework. Once I got home, I couldn't focus. I just couldn't I couldn't sit down and look at something and just do it.
Yeah.
So that's where I really was struggling, was what did I do when I didn't have the guidance? When I didn't have, and my family didn't know how to do it because they were all in the academics. They breathed through it.
Yes.
And so with me, I was lazy, or all I wanted to do was have a good time. And after a while, I started thinking, well, maybe that is it.
Yeah, that is me.
Maybe I'm having a good time. So that was a real struggle for me. And now having my eyes open when I'm 40, all of a sudden I'm starting to look back on this and I can see the pattern and all the things that I struggled with and all the challenges. It was heartbreaking for a while.
Yeah.
But it made me start thinking about the other kids that are out there that might be going through the same thing, the same struggle.
Now, did you leave high school and go on to college, or was there? Did you join the military in between? How did you get into doing the work you're doing?
I left high school and I went to San Jose City College.
Okay.
I absolutely hated it, and I went for 2 semesters. I couldn't stand it. I dropped out, and I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing. There was a concert that was happening in Oakland. It was Parliament Funkadelic. And I snuck up there to the concert, and I was sneaking through a hole in the back fence because I didn't have any tickets. So I'm sneaking through this hole in the fence, and this guy rides up on this motorcycle. He says, "Hey, have you seen anybody coming through this fence?" And I said, "Well, no. He says, do me a favor. I want you to stand right here and watch that fence. Don't let anybody through." I said, "Sure." He rides off on the motorcycle and comes back a few minutes later with the security guard. And he said, "Okay, this guard's going to take over." He said, "Thank you very much." And he says, "Hey, you want a job?" And I go, "Sure." He says, "You meet me at Stanford University next week. We have Day of the Green." It was Bill Graham.
Shut up.
Bill Graham presented. I had no idea. He was driving this old motorcycle. He had a leather helmet on. And he said, "Come back next week." So I go to Stanford the next week, and I'm looking around. I said, "This guy told me to come up here for a job." People go, "Who are you?" I said, "I don't know this guy. He was riding a motorcycle." I didn't even remember his name. I was so stupid. Anyway, he comes out from the back. He goes, "Oh, yeah, hey, come here, kid." He gave me a job, and I ended up, from there, I ended up going into production business, and I became a stage manager. And at the same time, I started going to school part-time and trying to work through. And the next thing you know, I'm doing tours. I'm touring with the Talking Heads, with Van Halen. I'm going all over the country with rock and roll bands. But I ended up having a real aptitude for working in that industry. I ended up working in artist relations, so I worked with a lot of very famous people, and I just was really good at it. After I had enough of rock and roll, by the time I was 27 or so, and I went to the city and applied for. They just opened the convention center downtown, and they hired me as the senior event services manager for the city, and so I was there for 20 years. I managed the Center for Performing Arts, the California Theater, the Convention Center, the Civic Auditorium, Montgomery. It was 7 buildings. And so I spent 20 years with the city managing those buildings, doing conventions, symphonies, ballets, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it was fortuitous in a lot of ways because I had no real direction at that time. I had dropped out of school a second time at City College because I couldn't stand the business aspect of it. Then I finally, when I got back to San Jose State, I transferred into theater arts, and that's how I made it. I was really lucky in a lot of ways. I stumbled my way through it and was blessed enough to find something on the path that I was on, not understanding that I had some serious challenges. I don't know what I would have done. Because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was taking business classes because my mom told me that's what I should take.
Right.
And oh my gosh, I got into economics and business administration, and I absolutely hated it. It wasn't something I was good at. But I think a lot of it has to do with what you like. Even if you're not good at something, if you like it enough, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
Because if you like it enough, you'll work at it.
Exactly.
And that's kind of the approach I take with kids. I don't care if you're good at it. Are you having fun? Do you see where it can lead? And if you can get them to that point, they'll do well.
Yeah.
And that even works with mathematics too. If you don't see the application to it, or if you're not having fun with it, or if you are having fun with it but you're not very good at it, you will work at it.
Yeah.
And you'll get better. And I've seen it with some of the kids that I work with, where they start off and they say, "No, I don't want to do that." All of a sudden, you look over there on the computer and they're just, and they're working with point clouds that have billions of points, and they're stitching these models together, and they're seeing the success. Half of it is confidence and success anyway. Once they're seeing that, hey, I can do this.
Right.
And when you tell them, hey, you're doing stuff that civil engineers are doing. You're doing stuff that these are people that come out and design bridges, people that come out and work on dams, that do construction, that build digital twins. These are people that are accomplished engineers, and you're doing the same thing they're doing right now. You don't know the foundation behind it,
right,
but you're doing the same work. Oh, and they're eager. You can see them. You can see them fill up. You can just see their heart fill up. And that's been a wonderful, wonderful experience for me.
Well, that is one eclectic way to get to where you are. I mean,
that's ADD.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell.
That's true.
That's it in a nutshell. Anytime I talk to someone that has ADD, they have the weirdest stories.
Yeah.
Especially the ones that are very successful, they always have strange stories of how they got to where they are.
Yeah.
It's never a direct path. It's always a bunch of little tangents here, and they end up where they end up.
Hey, watch that hole for me. Make sure nobody gets through.
And and it's funny because it was probably about 8 years after that I told him. About 8 years later, I've been working for him for a long time, and they were just opening the Shoreline Amphitheater. And he opening the Shoreline, we need a stage manager for the first few months. Would you mind managing the stage for the first? I said, I'd love to. We just finished the construction, and we're sitting there. A bunch of us were sitting around. We were drinking beers, and so Bill, when we met, years back, he goes, I don't really remember. I says, remember I was watching that hole in the back of the fence. He says, yeah. And I told him what I was doing.
What you're really doing?
He looked at me and he just was stunned. And he started to laugh. He says, I should have known. He says, I should have known.
What?
Said, so watch the hole for me, so we're good. But it was that same thing, it was like, it was what we were doing,
Well, you know what? I don't know how many nights the Funkadelic played in the Oakland Coliseum, but I had never heard of them before. My two sons said, "Hey, Mom, can we go see Funkadelic up in Oakland?" Well, at the time, they weren't old enough. My oldest boy was probably 15, and the younger man was 10. And I said, "You can't go by yourself, but I'll I'll take you, because I didn't know what I was getting myself into.
My daughter sees that now and she says, Dad, I can't believe that you guys were into that. I said, that was the best thing. I said, other than Earth, Wind, and Fire, that was the best thing that was going on.
I'm telling you.
She was laughing. She was, the guy's got a diaper on.
I know. Well, it's crazy. And the big long fur coat. Unbelievable. I could not believe what I was seeing. I came home and I told my husband, Al, you're not going to believe this. This is what they do. I don't think to this day he understands how amazing that was. But there was nobody else doing a show like that. Nobody.
No, their production was unbelievable. They put millions of dollars into that at the time.
So you're running all these different venues here in San Jose. But the last place was the convention center. Is that right?
That's right. I was the senior event services manager for the city, and we had 10 event coordinators, and we did everything from conventions to sporting events to the symphonies, the ballets, the operas. So it was really cool because I was able to introduce my daughters to that. I was able to take them to Broadway shows. I was able to take them backstage at the ballets and to take them in to see the symphony and to be able to meet people that were in the arts. And so from that perspective, I was just thrilled to be able to do that kind of thing and expose them to that kind of thing. One day, a friend of mine contacted me and he says, he was an engineer and he worked on construction. And he says, you rent space by the square foot, don't you? Of course I do. I manage the convention center for, yeah. So he says, well, how do you guys measure square footage? I says, well, like everybody else does. We take a laser pointer or we take tape measurers. And he says, well, there's a new technology where there's a laser scanner we can put in a room and we can collect 975,000 data points per second and render you a model that is millimeter accurate. And I says, you're kidding me. That can't be. And he says, well, yeah, actually the guy who developed it is an engineer, a civil engineer, and he's an Iraqi citizen. He lives here in Oakland, and he's created a company called SciArc, and you should check it out. So I went and started messing around with laser scanners, and I was hooked immediately. I've been doing it ever since.
Wow.
But it started off with just a way of hopefully enhancing the services we were already providing at the convention center. Of course, the city at that time didn't have the vision, so we ended up not adapting the technology. And it still really hasn't been adapted for convention centers yet. But the other things I got involved with, because I like history so much, I started looking around and thinking about what San Jose was like when I first got here and what it's like now and all the changes that have happened. And I started saying, okay, I want to start mapping and collecting data on these old buildings that I know aren't going to be here much longer, and mapping the change that's occurring in the valley. And so I started doing that as a hobby. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. If I can do this, I bet you I can teach a high school student to do this. And so that's when I went to Independence High School one day and said, hey, talked to the science department and said, hey, you got any kids that might want to be interested in learning how to make video games? And that's kind of how I got started with what I'm doing now.
Wow.
And I thought, it'd be a good way to introduce kids to something new. It'd be a good way. And then you're constantly hearing about how our kids can't do this. Our kids don't go into this. Have you ever heard of Coswell College?
Yes, I have.
The dean of Coswell College, have you met him yet? He spent over 17 years in the motion picture industry, and he's now the dean of Coswell. He's Black. Mm-hmm. His name is Jerome Sullivan.
Jerome Sullivan. Okay.
This guy is brilliant. I think he graduated from, I want to say Georgia Institute of Technology. But he is a brilliant mathematician. His father was the president of the NAACP down in Bakersfield. Oh. But now Jerome is here in the Bay Area. He's been here for years now. And he's the dean of Coswell College. And we've been talking about how can we get more of our kids into that industry? This guy's worked on Batman. He's worked on the Shrek movies. He's worked on just a ton of stuff. And so we've been talking about maybe having kids come together and teaching them Python or some other kind of computer languages and that kind of thing. One of the things we want to do is to be able to introduce our kids into gaming and that kind of thing. Coxwell is probably one of the top schools in the country, if not the world, when it comes to building computer games, teaching audio technology, video technology, and it's really fascinating. Very complicated, but we've been trying to think about some ways of pulling our resources together and trying to do something to help our kids in the community. Jerome is a super nice guy and very bright. You know, we were talking about animation because he obviously Coxwell does a lot of different types of engineering, but his was motion pictures and animation. And, you know, we were talking about that, and he says, well, you know, the thing that's complicated nowadays is animation is actually this art that's running on top of software. It used to be if you were an animator, you just had to be able to draw. Yeah. Now you have to be able to create not only the artwork, but the meshes that go behind it. So the math part is very complicated. I think that if you got kids, even if they didn't feel like math was a real strength of theirs, if they're having fun with it, they will try.
What you're telling me is that you're a different kind of learner, and that's what young people need to understand, is everyone doesn't learn the same. And if
you're not successful in one system, that doesn't mean that you're stupid. Doesn't mean that you can't learn. It just means that you learn different. And unfortunately, that was my experience with my as I mentioned, with my counselor in high school. Hey, you're not college material. Instead of, hey, you need to look at what you want to do and look and try to focus and try to find where your path is. She didn't tell me that. Go get a job somewhere. Yeah. Oh, but this is funny. Years later, the symphony is opening that night, and I get a call from the Center for Performing Arts saying, hey, we have a problem here with some patrons. There's some ticket issues. And I said, well, turn it over to the box office manager. They said, well, the box office manager's here. This has gotten ugly. Can you come over? Well, I walked over from the convention center, and I'm wearing my tuxedo because it's opening night for the opera, too. And I'm dressed to the nines, and I walk in the lobby, and here's my high school counselor, the one that told me I wasn't. And she's there with my high school English teacher. And I walk over to him, and I recognize her. I love my high school English teacher, so I went straight to her and said, hey, Mrs. Lee, it's good to see you. And my high school counselor's name was Mrs. Sweat. And she looked at me and she said, Brian Miller? And I said, yes, how are you? It's good to see you again. I was seething underneath. I really felt like telling her off. But I said, how are you tonight? She said, I'm doing great. She says, I always knew you were going to be successful in whatever you did. And I thought to myself, I said, you don't think I remember what she said? So you're in charge of all of this, of all of these buildings? I said, yeah, I'm the senior event services manager for the city. So I'm here to help get this whole straightened out. But, you know, and she went on and on about how great I was and how I was always the sharpest kid around. And I'm thinking, what the heck? At the same time, if that's the way she wants to remember it, that's fine with me.
That's cool. You know. But maybe she really did feel that way, and she thought by being negative or giving you negative information, it might spur you on to change or challenge her. Maybe.
That's what my grandmother said. My grandmother said the same thing, and I, you know what, Grandma, I'll take that.
Okay.
I'll take that. That's fine. You know. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I drove my mom crazy. My mom thought I was just lazy. You know, all you want to do is football and girls. Like, well, I don't think that's it, Mom, but I am struggling.
To circle back to the earlier discussion about the teens that you work with and how you are using the laser technology to instruct them in the uses of math and laser mapping, has the pandemic affected the process?
Especially what I do, because my job is all working in the field with teams of students. And how do you take teams of students out into the community to do work under these circumstances? It's just been Well, we actually have to collect the data, and then we have to actually process it. So and it's very complicated. So trying to do it remotely is very difficult. We're working on 2 big projects right now, and they're both kind of been stalled. One of them is we're trying to create a digital twin of the James Lick Observatory. And which means we need to take kids up there, we need to take laser scanners and heavy equipment and start actually the process of digitally processing this data. And that's been a real challenge. It was going to be challenging anyway because the site is so remote. But yeah, yeah, exactly. I didn't want to be that right. I just wanted to be a little right would have been nice. But at the same time, this is what we've been working for years. We've talked about this for years when we talked about creating these digital twins and being able to do projects online. So we knew that this was coming. It's been something that we've been working on for 5 years, and it creeped us up on us so quickly now. It's like I keep going back to Google and some of my sponsors and saying, see, this is what I told you was going to happen. This is why I told you we needed to be here 3 years ago. It's kind of nice to know that you were right, but at the same time,
I know, but do we have to be that right?
Thank you, Brian, for sharing your life and learning with us. Your story may help many young people struggling with his or her studies to understand that their abilities are different than the norm. You have clearly shown that learning can be attained in different ways. You can learn more about Brian Miller and his work in reality capture on his LinkedIn page or on Facebook, Points Taken, spelled POINTZTAKEN. Thank you, Brian Miller, and thank you for listening.